For over half a century, starting with the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963, a series of legally binding arms control regimes prevented further proliferation of nuclear weapons and restricted the existing stockpiles. However, under the weight of geopolitical events, nearly all agreements have come to a stop and may completely collapse in the near future. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. During the Cold War, the nuclear arms control regimes played a decisive role in the normalization of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. But this understanding did not appear on its own. It took a number of dangerous events for the two superpowers to realize the dangers of a nuclear arms race and the need for a legal framework. So, in spite of their differences, both sides agreed that an accidental nuclear war was the greatest threat to international security, and that an arms control was necessary to limit the nuclear stockpiles. The subsequent arm limitation agreements did not eliminate nuclear weapons from the geopolitical environment. However, the legally binding framework and the verification provisions built somewhat trust between the belligerents. As a result, in the perception of the public and policymakers, nuclear bombs steadily lost its function as an instrument of armed conflict. So, ironically, humankind's most deadly weapon became a conduit for cooperation and stability after the late 1960s. As hectic as the Cold War was, policymakers at the time acted with great precautions. Meanwhile, modern politicians came into their offices after decades of stabilized relations and cohesive nuclear arms control. By comparison, the latter tends to act more insolent when it comes to nuclear weapons. For instance, in early March 2018, Putin unveiled a host of new arms in his annual presidential address to Russia's Federal Assembly. In theory, the displayed next-generation weapons can fly under, over, and around any functional defense system, and they are similar to the ones in development by the Americans and Chinese. However, Putin's insistence that the new weapons would force the Pentagon to listen to the Kremlin's needs erodes the arms control regimes of the Cold War. To underscore his point, Putin's visual presentation displayed how a hypersonic missile traveled across the globe before reaching the state of Florida. The message was loud and clear: Russia is a technologically advanced nation and one to be reckoned with. This segment of the speech reaped most of the global attention, and most media outlets were quick to blame the Kremlin for provoking a new arms race. Yet, in all fairness, the Pentagon bears equal responsibility for this development. To clarify, in December 2001, President Bush unilaterally withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, or ABM for short. Under this treaty, which was negotiated by the Nixon and Brezhnev administration in 1972, each side agreed to limit the number and location of short and medium-range anti-missile systems. For 30 years, the ABM treaty functioned as the cornerstone of the nuclear weapon limitation process. But when Bush withdrew from the agreement, he claimed that it was necessary to defend against missile attacks from rogue states and terrorist organizations. To add insult to injury, Bush further aggravated the situation by announcing plans to install a missile defense complex in Poland and the Czech Republic. The argument was that these fortifications would serve to intercept missiles from Iran. For Russia, however, the plan made no sense. In technical terms, an anti-Iran missile complex would make more sense in Turkey or in Azerbaijan, which is what Russia proposed. However, the Pentagon simply neglected the Russian concerns and acted as it pleased. At the time, Moscow was in a weakened state and Putin was in no position to challenge the decision of Bush. Less than a decade later, President Obama placed downgraded missile defense systems in Poland and Romania. Policymakers in Moscow viewed the installations as a starting measure to restrict their response to a conventional NATO assault, because it disrupts the mutually assured destruction doctrine. This deterrence policy claims that the threat of weapons of mass destruction diminishes if the enemy has the same weapons. The doctrine required Moscow and Washington to arm themselves in order to assure that neither side had any incentives to initiate a conflict. And as insane as it sounds, the doctrine worked adequately over the course of the Cold War. However, when Bush withdrew from the ABM treaty and Obama placed missile defense platforms in Eastern Europe, Russian analysts warned that it would lead to a new arms race. Although it did not take effect immediately, it has come to pass now. Putin responded to Obama's missile complex by embarking on a program to develop and deploy new ground-launched cruise missiles that can surpass the existing American ballistic missile defense systems. However, these actions violated the obligations of another arms control regime, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or better known as the INF Treaty. Signed in 1987, the treaty prohibits the development and possession of ground-launched cruise and ballistic missiles which ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers and provides intrusive inspections to uphold the obligations. However, the present geopolitical landscape is very different than when the treaty was negotiated. In response to NATO's eastward expansion and in violation of the INF treaty, Russia deployed dozens of ground-launched cruise missiles closer to the borders of its adversaries. Today, the unfortunate reality is that the Kremlin and the Pentagon are at a deadlock. The Americans have expressed no interest to talk about the ABM treaty, and Russian officials, for their part, openly question the value of the INF treaty and have raised the possibility of withdrawing from it. The situation was recently further complicated when Trump refused Putin's proposal to extend the New START for 5 years. The New START, which stands for Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, seeks to establish a new verification regime with the ultimate goal to reduce the number of nuclear missile launchers by half. It is the largest and most complex arms control treaty in history, and it is set to expire in 2021. The unfortunate truth is that most lawmakers in the US Congress have expressed no interest to extend or renegotiate the New START. In fact, some Republicans argue for the United States to withdraw from the New START in retaliation for Russia's violation of the INF treaty. Meanwhile, the Russians are unwilling to negotiate over the INF treaty as long as the ABM treaty is inactive. So, while the two sides argue over the technicalities, the stalemate is undermining the nuclear arms control. And as the ABM, INF, and New START arms control regimes continue to erode, it is doubtful whether Washington has any real interest in an arms control. For lobbyists of the American military-industrial complex, an arms race sounds rather appealing. Some US officials have even claimed that the new hypersonic weapons and glide vehicles do not fall within the parameters of ballistic missiles, which opens up a lot of lucrative opportunities for the defense industry. Moreover, the new Ballistic Missile Defense Review, which will be released in late March, is expected to call for a new fleet of space-based arms and directed energy weapons. The review will guide the Secretary of State to identify current and future threats posed by ballistic missiles and advise the government on how to strengthen the missile defense policy of the United States. In other words, calls for a new arms race are steadily gaining ground in the Pentagon. The history of the nuclear arms control has endured setbacks before, but the austerity of the current dispute is unprecedented. Every diplomatic channel is at a deadlock, and many politicians from both nations are on a course to destroy everything that was painstakingly built during the Cold War. To avoid a catastrophe, policymakers from Washington and Moscow must embark on a new round of arms control negotiations that focus on the ABM, INF, New START as well as on hypersonic missiles. If the crisis is not resolved, it will result in the complete and utter disintegration of the existing framework of treaties and regimes, with dramatic political, economic, and military consequences for international security. In this desolate scenario, global leaders must remind themselves of the old Cold War saying, if you don't take care of nuclear weapons, they will take care of you. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, now would be a good time to do so. Just remember to click on the grey bell icon to enable notifications. Also, if you are looking for additional channels that focus on geopolitical topics, check out Foreign Chronicles by Patrice. His latest video concerns the geopolitical impact of the flow of migrants in North Africa. The link will be in the description, so that's definitely worth watching. Finally, special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who give us the resources to produce content like this. If you would like to join our network and help us to remain independent, visit our crowdfunding network on patreon.com/Caspian Report. In any case, thank you for your time and Sarol.